Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Red Planet Live podcast. I am your host, Ashton Zith. I'm elated to be hosting the Mars Society's podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. Thank you, everybody, for joining today and supporting Red Planet Live. So as usual, before we kick off the conversation and introduce today's guest, want to remind you that the Mars Society store is live and available for shopping. So don't forget to pick up any of your Mars swag, like if you're interested in the Mars Globe, we got one back there, or the Mars Zen Garden. Those are available on the marsstore.com, so check that out. But for today, very excited about today's guest. This is going to be a great conversation, so you've tuned in on the right day. So today's conversation is going to feature a special woman. Kirsten Whittingham is the president of MaxSpace, a cutting-edge space technology company pushing the boundaries of innovation and exploration by designing and manufacturing affordable, high-fidelity, expandable space habitats. Now, she brings a wealth of experience and leadership to the company with a successful career spanning spacecraft, aerospace, defense across commercial, military, government sectors. And prior to her role, Ms. Whittingham also held several senior positions at Axiom Space, including as the Vice President of Revenue Operations. She also served as Director of the F-100 program for Pratt & Whitney, which is a Raytheon technology subsidiary. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Everybody, welcome Kirsten to the podcast today.
Hi, Ashton.
Hey there. I'm so excited that you're here to join me today and excited for our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
So we're going to kick off the conversation as we normally do on the podcast. We do a quick segment called Question of the Day. So I promise there's no right or wrong answers. We won't judge whatever your answer is, but it's just to get the conversation started. So for today, our question of the day is: what is one personal item that you could not leave Earth without? So imagine you're getting on a rocket, you're flying out and you're going out to space. What is the one thing that you could not leave behind?
I can leave everything behind. My husband hates it. I'm a little bit of a minimalist, and I could just trash everything tomorrow. But I would say that rocket or that capsule that I'm on has got to have coffee. I can't live a day without coffee. So that's really important to me.
Okay. And how do you typically take your coffee? Like if you'll have to have coffee on that capsule, do you need to have any accessories to go with it?
No, just black. Black is fine. The stronger, the better. Mine looks a little bit like sludge when I make it at the house. So the thicker and nastier it is for most people, the better it is for me.
Okay. So not like a cold brew or an espresso. You're just like straight.
No. Straight black. And I've been drinking it black since I was 8 years old. I would go out to eat with my parents and I would order it at the restaurants. And at first, I was just sort of, putting on airs, trying to be like my dad and stuff. But I would order it at the restaurants. The waitresses would always look at my parents like, what am I really supposed to do here? And they're like, just give it to her.
Like parent approval? Like, is it okay if I feed the child? Maybe maybe it's not a wives' tale, but drinking coffee is going to stunt your growth or something.
I'm 5'9", so if it did, thank God.
I love it. Well, I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. Been chatting with my friends, my colleagues, my cohort, and telling them that we were going to speak today. And so everybody's really excited to hear from you. So would love to kick off the conversation and dive right in. Want to remind everybody that's listening, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We'll try to get those sprinkled out through the conversation. But if you don't mind, let's start at the very beginning. Tell us about your background. Did you always want to get into aerospace? Since a child, were you always interested in going this route in your professional career?
Pretty much. I don't even remember it, but I had an aunt who told me that when I was 3 years old, I said that I wanted to be an astronaut. And she's like, and I knew from that moment on that that's what you would do something in the space industry because you were so persistent, even at 3 years old, that's just very clearly what you wanted to do. So I was lucky enough to go to space camp when I was in 6th grade. And up until that point, I didn't have any other language for saying that I was interested in space. I just said astronaut because that's what you say when you're in like fourth grade or something like that. But when I went to space camp in sixth grade, I got to be part of a shuttle simulation is what they did at the time. I don't know what they do now. But you had astronauts and you had flight controllers, and I got assigned to be a flight controller. And while I was very disappointed in that at the time, I was like, oh, wait, the flight controllers are the ones that are telling the astronauts what to do. And I kind of like that. So I want to be a flight controller now. So from then on, that's what I wanted to do. And I got my aerospace engineering degree for that reason, to be a flight controller. When I graduated from Embry-Riddle, it was pretty close after the Columbia accident. There were not a lot of flight controller positions. So actually my first job out of college was as a contractor at an Air Force base. And I did space and missile type testing there. And then after 2 years, NASA was hiring at that point again for flight controllers. And I went and I became a space shuttle flight controller, and then transitioned over to the ISS program. So I got to work both sides of the house there, and just achieved my dreams. It was very cool. And I'm so glad that I was able to do that.
That's incredible. I have to ask, was Space Camp like the movie Space Camp?
No, but I did watch that growing up and going, I don't know, is that possible? Can I be launched on a rocket to go into space?
Just accidentally like going, through a simulation and then it ends up launching. I watched that movie not too long ago, so it's top of mind. That's why I asked.
Okay. Yeah. No, it was very different. I think just in general, I mean, aside from the launching, it was very different. It was much more camp focused and a lot less. They were very independent in the movie. That's not how it was there, but still a good time.
We're squashing some dreams for
I think so.
That, we're hoping that was the case, but no, that's incredible. So forever you've wanted to be in aerospace. You knew that was the path. Obviously had a lot of roles along the way, and now you're serving as the president of MaxSpace, which is very interesting. Can you talk us through like what is MaxSpace? What's it building? How was the company started?
Sure. So MaxSpace, to the outsider, is going to look like a startup, and it's going to look like a new company. It's not really. There are 3 inflatables that are in space today. Genesis 1, that was launched in 2006. Genesis 2 right after that. And then the Beam, which is attached to the International Space Station. So inflatables have been around for quite some time, and all of those have some sort of heritage from a company called Thin Red Line, which is in British Columbia in Canada. That company is owned by a man named Maxim, and he's the one that has guided space inflatables are in orbit. He has wanted to commercialize this technology for some time now, and he got partnered up with our other co-founder, Aaron, who is one of the 4 co-founders of Made in Space. So a lot of folks who have paid attention to the space industry will recognize that name. Made in Space is now Redwire, but it's like one of the original successful space commercialization companies. Yeah. So the 2 of them got together and said, okay, hey, we're gonna do something with this. It's going to be something that we make products out of, we market to the government, whether that's civil, like NASA or the DoD. And we're going to look at what those applications are. And as they talked about that more, they realized they needed to bring somebody in that had a little background in business development and customer management. And that's me. So I was lucky enough to get the job as president. I'm very, very excited to be here and to help them shape what that product strategy is going to look like going forward and what that roadmap looks like. How are we going to eat the elephant in one bite at a time, right? Because it's a big thing to say, okay, well, we're going to be here in 10 years, but how are we going to do that in very logical steps?
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. We're going to dive into all of this, but I think we have a quick video to show. We could play that. That would be.
This was created to maximize space in a way that's never been possible before. Our mission is to unlock a new frontier for humanity. MaxSpace means betterment for all humans on this new frontier. Models are bigger, easier to manufacture, and more scalable than other systems. We just finished our full fidelity ground unit and are now building our flight unit, which will be the largest expandable habitat to ever go to space.
Oh, it gives me chills. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. Okay, so can you talk us through a little bit about the design of the inflatable? You said the inflatables have been around for a while, but talk us through the design. Well, like what's unique about the MaxSpace modular?
So there's a couple of different things to break down here. Most of the modules that are in space today are made from metallics. Those are very heavy and of course rigid and strong in their own ways. But inflatables offer the ability, first of all, they don't weigh as much to produce the volume on orbit that you need to produce for that same, how am I trying to say this? If you want to make a 100-meter cubed module, when you send up a metallic module, it's going to be 100 meters cubed, built that way and launched that way. You're just going to packed an inflatable, and it's going to be very small, just like an umbrella. That's the way I like to think about it. Umbrellas are very tightly packaged when you first get them, but they expand way out. The inflatables, though, are lighter than those metallic counterparts.
Yeah.
The unique thing about our inflatable modules, because there are competitors that are working on them, they typically go for what's called a basket weave design. It's exactly what it sounds like. It is literally basket weaved. That is much heavier than our structure. Our structure is unidirectional. There is no weaving, and it still has the same strength, same protection against micrometeoroid impacts. There's good radiation protection. So it's still as safe as anything else. And I like to emphasize that there have been modules on orbit since 2006, still up there. It's obviously very safe, because a lot of people say, oh, it's an inflatable. Is it like a balloon? It's not like a balloon.
Right.
You have to sort of divorce yourself from that comparison. The other type of inflatable that people are kind of familiar with, but maybe not the same type of thing, is the spacewalk suits. Spacewalk suits are just another form of inflatables. So anyway, it is cheaper to manufacture. It's cheaper to launch because you pay for your launch based on mass value a lot of times. So if you're already less mass, then you save money there too. And it offers the same protections. So we do think that there will be a really good market for this as we move forward.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, looking to commercialize this, you said, you think that there's a market for this. I think you said at the beginning that you're primarily focusing on civil, so NASA, and then some of the DoD type of customers, and that's where you're looking to sell this, right?
That's correct. I think right now, a lot of our focus at the moment is going into DoD applications because we are a small company and we have the ability to work as a small business and go after some of that sort of set aside in one way of looking at it, and showing off what we have, but also getting a little bit of funding to improve upon maybe certain aspects that we need to improve upon. So the DoD is an area that I personally spend a lot of time on, but there are NASA applications. We talk to primes and just try to fill out where we can help in those NASA applications. But there are also other applications that could be coming up in the future. I would say we're not really ready for them right now, but maybe at some point a private individual says, hey, I just want a little getaway in space. That's going to become a reality at some point. And so hopefully that's something that we can also play in.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are some of the long-term visions? Like you mentioned, obviously DoD, you're focusing on that, but maybe there's a private person or a company that wants to do this. So I imagine like a space hotel, like you're selling tickets, and somebody that wants a once in a lifetime experience, they're going to go and spend some time in one of these modules. Is that kind of what you're imagining for long-term goals?
There is, and let's talk about this in two ways. I'll talk about the market, and then I want to talk a little bit about those goals. But restate it in a different way. We kind of have four different ways that I look at the market. You have DoD, you have civil space, which is mostly NASA, but could be international government agencies as well. You have the commercial LEO destination providers. Maybe they themselves need a little bit of extra storage volume on their stations. That could be a market for us. And then you sort of have this long-term other, whether that's entertainment, a movie studio in space, or a private individual wants to own a module, or hotels, that type of thing. That is something that I think the CLDs themselves are also trying to develop, and I think that is further out. But for us, our roadmap looks a little bit more like this. We do have a flight that is going to launch in early 2026, Alpha 20 module, which is 20 meters cubed. It is our first flight for Max Space, but again, not Maxim's first flight. He has other modules in space. So we're going to look at ways to make sure that this module demonstrates our ability to work with customers and deliver on the requirements that they have set forth for us. So that's in early 2026. We already have that flight booked with SpaceX. Now, on top of that, one of the next things that we're doing, like I said, is working with the DoD and with a customer base of sorts. They're not our customer base yet, but talking to them and doing customer discovery and saying, well, what is it that you need from us? And we're getting more of a roadmap that is solidified that I think we will, roll out and make public in the next few months.
That's so cool. That's so exciting. What does the testing look like prior to that launch in 2026? How do you do testing on Earth, or have there been some just payload launches that we've tested ahead of time? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's a number of tests that are related to any type of module, really, but you'll see if you follow along with some of the competitors on social media that there's something called a burst test, and that's what gets a lot of the news because that's when you blow up the inflatable and it pops, and that's where you do kind of get closer to that balloon analogy.
Yeah.
And I was just dialoguing with somebody who's outside of the space industry who was like, I understand theoretically that was successful because they're saying that it's successful, but I don't really know what that means. And so let's talk a little bit about that. The burst test takes the module to at least a safety factor of 4. So you're going to hold a normal atmospheric pressure inside of that. You need to hold more than that times 4, and then maybe more than that. And then if it bursts above that, you're good. So you want to prove that you can burst above that sort of set pressure. So that is one of the more dramatic tests that you'll see, but there are other tests. There are tests making sure that the module will deploy the way that it needs to deploy, and Maximum team have been working on that. There are compression tests. There's strength tests on the tendons that you can see in our module. There's vacuum testing, wind tunnel testing. There's all sorts of vibe and shake testing. So yeah, it is a thoroughly tested module by the time that it gets into space, and we're more than confident that it will, meet the requirements that we have for it.
Where does that typically happen? Is this happening in sort of inside of a vacuum, or you're testing somewhere like the Mojave? What does that look like? Where does it happen?
Mostly near Maxim's facility in British Columbia. He's got plenty of space up there. But Marshall Space Flight Center also has facilities, and I think as we can get further along, we anticipate using some of their facilities from time to time, depending on the scale of the module, for example, or the end user. Certainly if NASA is the end user of a module, we're probably going to be testing at Marshall Space Flight Center because it just makes sense for that. Yeah.
What could some of the future crew that are going to stay in the module, what could they expect the experience to be like?
That's a good question. I mean, we would definitely like to see improvement, and I say we, I think just as a community, improvement over the International Space Station. And not to put down the International Space Station, but it's been up there and it's a workhorse. It's becoming very crowded. But also, even since day one, as a former flight controller, I know that it's very noisy. It can be very smelly. It can be hard to clean. And so these are all types of things that we're looking at for our modules as well. And I'm sure others are also looking. We have learned from the International Space Station. And so you now know what you need to do to make it better, how to make it easier to maintain. That's another thing that happens with the International Space Station is they just spend a lot of time doing what we call R&Rs, repair and replace. You want to make sure that your new module doesn't have those same features, that you have taken the lessons learned, that you're providing a better experience for everybody. That generally is going to mean that module allows you to get more science and manufacturing done versus having to maintain, having to upkeep, having to change out filters, that type of thing. We would also like to see, of course, a lot more windows. All those astronauts on the ISS get crowded into the cupola because it's really the only place to look out of. And so I know anybody that is designing any type of habitat, whether that's for lunar or Mars applications, that's something that people are thinking about, is how to give people a good view.
Yeah, That's got to be the thing that everybody looks forward to. I mean, every astronaut that's in space wants to be able to look out and see the universe, see Earth. I think we have a video of the inside from Max Space, if we could play that. Pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about some of the science that's happening like on the ISS. Is that all the same science that could occur within the expandable space habitat? Is there any limitation to the type of science that could happen?
No real limitation. And it's interesting. I was talking to some end users that are currently doing some work on the International Space Station today. They let me know that actually crew is not preferred for them. If you could sort of get a robotic station up and running, that might work better for their long-term manufacturing. So sort of segued from science into manufacturing, but that's the purpose of the International Space Station, is to uncover science that can turn into real things, right? So speaking to some of those people doing manufacturing, they're like, yeah, I mean, if you had a way where it would just work, all of their things are set up to be the International Space Station, like shirt sleeve environment.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you didn't have crew, you would still want to maintain that same environment for that manufacturing process. But keeping the crew from maybe, I don't exactly know what they were talking about, but maybe it's jostling or, whatever interference that is with them coming and looking. I think of us cooking sometimes, at least my mother used to say, watch a pot never boils. And so maybe that's the same type of thing, where if you have the crew members there looking at it too much or in the neighborhood too much, that it could cause problems.
Interesting. Okay, I hadn't considered that. I think we have another video as well that I want to show us about some of the plant growth that could happen. So in the video there, we saw there was a robotic arm. So in that scenario, is this fully autonomous? This is expecting that this is going to be a robot that's maintaining the plant growth.
That's the thought process there. And there's nothing that would be like that today. And I don't think anything's quite ready for that. It's my understanding. Other people can prove me wrong. But yeah, that's a thought process. And going back to why would you do that? Well, that's mostly for the moon and Mars. They're going to need to have plants that they're growing there. It's going to be a lot of plants. Well, we can provide a lot of volume, and that volume is very cheap to get there and to manufacture. And now you can grow a lot of different plants. You can, as you saw, you have them sort of stacked up on top of each other, have different kinds of plants on each level with different kinds of lighting. So yeah, but that was the thought process there, is that it would be autonomous with no crew requirement.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be necessary once we're sending crews to the moon, or we're sending them to Mars. My question is about, could the space habitat be sent to Mars? Like in the video that we saw, it was deployed in space, so it's floating. Mm-hmm. Could this be used on the surface of surface of the moon or the Mars?
Yes, and that's one of our other intents here, is to make sure that we position ourselves as well as we can to be part of that type of architecture as well.
What are some of the current, thinking about getting habitats to Mars right now, what are some of the current challenges or limitations in that development process? Obviously, like, we got to get, there's funding, we got to get rockets there, all of that. But right now, with the development and the design, the manufacture, the creation of the habitats, how do you think about the surface of Mars when you're trying to build a habitat that could be making that trip or that journey to Mars?
So I think the number one concern for me, when we start talking about Mars and Martian applications, whether it's a truly crew habitat or these agricultural type habitats, mm-hmm. You've got to have a really good ecosystem, and that's a life support system for folks who don't know. So this is what makes sure that you have oxygen, that you can scrub out the carbon dioxide, because that'll give you headaches. So you still have to have some version of that. And what we have right now is very heavy It breaks a lot, and I'm talking about the International Space Station. So you're going to have something that's really robust, especially for Mars, because you don't have the ability to get a lot of spare parts. And, you don't want people getting sick because they don't have a good life support system. So I think that's the number one challenge, is figuring out how to integrate that in to whatever you're doing.
Absolutely. No, that's crucial. You just mentioned the ISS again, and I just have to ask, I've talked to other guests about this before, but the current plan for NASA to decommission the ISS, I know that there's been talks about like maybe up orbiting it, but it sounds like right now the plan is to pretty much let it fall back into the ocean. What are your thoughts on that?
I kind of get pushing it up there. I get both sides of this, right? Like I get pushing it up there, but it's like, well, why? It's just going to be sitting up there, and for what? Mm-hmm. I do also worry about space debris, and I think even when you push things out to another orbit, at some point those orbits become crowded. They're not crowded today, but at some point we just start pushing enough things out there. Mm-hmm. So what future problem are we pushing off in order to make that decision to push it up to a different orbit? I think it's smarter to bring it down. I'm not sure if and I truly mean I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I think that the current plan is the right plan. But I definitely think something needs to be done that isn't just saying, oh, well, we didn't want to deal with it, so we're going to go park it somewhere. Mm-hmm. Then we're just going to end up with, junkyard in space.
Yeah. And so for those that are unfamiliar, can you give a quick overview about why NASA is looking to decommission the ISS?
Yeah, I mean, it's outlived its usable life. I think when they first started designing it, I think that they had tried to design every system to be around 30 years. And that's really where we're at right now. So when you're in space and the systems start to wear out, your structural systems on the external, if those wear out, then you can get leaks. And those can be, of course, very dangerous to the crew. With such a large volume, you're probably okay. But if you had a smaller volume, a leak or even a big leak could be a very big problem. So it's things like that. And as I was just hitting on with a life support system, always having to do repair and replace. That's not their purpose. Their purpose up there isn't to service the space station. Their purpose is to be doing payloads. So when you get to this point where you can't even do your job because let's switch subjects and say it's like having a house that it's the money pit. If you've ever seen that, that's kind of where we're at, where you're just throwing money into this house to upkeep it and make it look really good. And you're just throwing money into it.
It's falling apart around you, and you're just spinning your wheels trying to keep it going. And so a lot of the technology is a little bit antiquated. It's archaic now. It's not up to date. So astronauts that are at the ISS are spending a lot of their daily time and effort is just maintenance and repair, right?
Right. That's right. At least my understanding, I haven't sat on console in a long time, but even when I was on console a while back, it was still a lot of repair and replace. And another way of also looking at this is just talking about how archaic those systems are. All those cords that you see now routed through the ISS, it didn't used to be that way. They're being routed. My understanding now is because the systems weren't designed to fit in the way that they needed to fit in. So now you have to route things differently, and it gets crowded and cluttered, and it's not necessarily great for people's psychological well-being to be in 6 months in such a crowded, junky place, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe they need a larger inflatable space habitat.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the beam, and they use it for storage. That's what they use it for. And we will have more should they need more for storage, and something for other space station companies to think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, you touched on the space debris. We've talked about the ISS and how, a lot of that is failing technology. It's turning into junk. So I'm curious about MaxSpace and its intents to incorporate some sustainable practices into its technology. What are some of the efforts to be sustainable, but also what are some of the challenges that you're facing when you're trying to balance innovation with environmental responsibility?
Yeah, and I think all the space companies are kind of going to have the same types of challenges. All is always the wrong way to put it. There's probably some out there that are much more sustainable, but when you're putting things into space, you're definitely using a lot of energy. There's that type of thing that's happening all the time. The nice thing, going back to our modules weighing less, is that you could launch the volume of the ISS today in one Falcon 9 using our technology. So when you start talking about not having to use as many launches to get things done and the environmental impacts that has, it definitely makes a lot more sense to use something like this. I don't think it's right in every application, but there are definitely applications where it is right. And so where it is right, I think we should be looking at, well, how do we conserve launches by not sending up big, heavy architecture? So I think that's the biggest way that we play in this. We are doing some talks too about how maybe we can help with orbital debris. That's still in the very early stages. But those are the two big ways I think we help with this conversation.
Yeah. What would be the approach of the tactic there with orbital debris?
A container.
Okay. Interesting. All right. That's going to be become more and more of an issue as more satellites are launched. There's more being built, either in, like the low Earth orbit. I had heard not too long ago that Axiom, where you were previously at, was looking to build the first commercial space station. Can you just give us some insights about your time at Axiom, what it was that you were working on, and maybe what the goal there was?
Sure. And, I have a lot of good friends still at Axiom today, and I wish them all the best. I still really cheer them on from the sidelines, and I think that they have a great vision, and I hope to see them succeed. I was the vice president of revenue operations, and so I helped with sales and marketing and trying to make sure that we had efficient revenue processes. I also had a team of program managers that oversaw the customer contracts that we sold, like with ESA, with the Italian Air Force, for example. I was the one that negotiated those agreements, got those in place, and then I had a team that supported those. So very tied in with the mission part of it, also very tied in with sales and marketing and sort of the strategy that leads up to getting to the mission.
That's so exciting. I selfishly am excited by that. I come from a background, I work in tech, I work for an automation software company, but have always been interested in space and have been, wondering like, hey, is there room for me? As my cohort friend, Allison says, is there space for me in space? And so, for those of us that want to get into space, that want to be a part of the mission, we want to help get, people back to get people to Mars. What would you say to those that maybe don't have a technical background? I'm not an engineer, but I'm looking to make that transition into a space industry. What advice would you give us?
Go apply. There are a number. I think there are a number of jobs that every larger company is going to have, especially if they're putting astronauts into space, like the Axioms and the Voyagers. They need finance, just like any other company. They need lawyers, just like other companies. They're going to need IT people. So like if you're fitting into some of those categories, or you're a salesperson, or you're a software designer, you know what? They probably have a job, and they're probably needing somebody to take those jobs on. And those can be valuable ways of getting your foot in the door for other opportunities. When I worked at Axiom, as an example, I hired over people from other places in the company. There was a joke that I kidnapped people. I never kidnapped anybody. They all came to me and asked for a job. So, and I had jobs and I was able to do it. But I had a lady that came over to me from accounting. I had actually a lady that left mission operations to come work for me. There was a lady that worked in the investment section, and she came and worked for me as program managers, project managers, that type of thing. So if your background is accounting and you're like, yeah, but I want to do something else. Yeah, but you can go do accounting for a space company and then transition more easily into something else within that space company because you're already there. You speak the language, you know what they're doing, you understand the strategy. And that's what I would tell people to do.
Okay. I love that. So there is an opportunity. There is access for those that, maybe have non-traditional backgrounds, but, like you said, space companies still need lawyers. They still need accountants. Can you, at a high level, kind of talk through what business development or what commercialization looks like for a space company?
Yeah, it is different than for maybe software as a sales, for example. And I was just having a conversation with a website company about that. They're talking about collecting email addresses and the sign up and how you do the funnel. I'm like, that is not how we work. You are going to go out and you're going to identify the people, whether that's in government or within some of these corporations. Maybe, like I said, you need to work with a prime in order to sell your product. You need to go identify who those are. You map stakeholders within organizations, and you make sure you're talking to all the right people. It's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of follow-up. It is not as quick as software as a service might be, where you might do 1 or 2 phone calls, and then hopefully you've sold something. It can take months of just kind of keeping the conversation warm, keeping them up to date, learning about what changes they've had in their organization, and then figuring out maybe how you can respond to that change and just kind of work through that relationship building process and target, of course, the whole time you're looking at ways to strategically target them.
Yeah.
But ultimately it boils down to a lot of conversations.
Okay. We're going to keep that in mind. I have to ask, you are a leader, you're a female and you're a leader of a space company. What has your experience been like? I know that, just like in tech, space is very male dominated. What has your experience been like as a female leader in this company, but in others that you've been a part of?
Well, I want to take you all the way back to the beginning of my career and say I really lucked out, but I think the way to talk about that luckiness is to start with the very first job I had. I had the women's bathroom to myself. I was the only woman in the entire building, and the men just looked out for me there. They were all mostly older. They had grandkids a lot of times, or older kids. And because of the way my desk faced the facility manager, I was a project manager, but I faced the facility manager. People would come in to talk to him about the status of the facility. Test facility, we lit things on fire. It was very cool. So they come in to talk to him. He'd be out in the facility, as he should be. And they would look at me and assume that I was the admin and ask me to page him. And I on purpose, never learned how to page him because I didn't want to be the person that had to call him.
Yeah.
So I would say I have no idea how to do that. And they would look at me like I was crazy. And then I would refer them to somebody else that could page Kevin in. And then Kevin, knowing what had happened, would come into me. I'm not his boss. We are colleagues. And he would say, okay, Kirsten, boss, I need to talk to you about a few things. He would show that person up, because he knew it was happening so frequently. So he would put people in their place. It made me feel very secure. And I think that started me off on the right foot for the rest of my career. But I've also just been incredibly lucky. I haven't run across a lot of really nasty issues. I've had them. I've had a few here and there. But for the most part, it's been nothing but supportive teams. And at Pratt & Whitney, I'd like to call them out because I had so many wonderful female leaders that I could look up to and ask questions of. I'm still in contact with some of them today. They had great programs to develop female leaders. And I think, again, I was just very lucky to be part of that.
Have you seen a shift in the industry and the ecosystem, that there is more opportunities for women, that there's more diversity in the industry?
I wish I could say yes. Of course, Ashton, I see the shift. I don't. I had interviewed for another job at the same time that I was talking to MaxSpace, and I pointed out to them that their entire leadership page was all white men. And I wanted to hear from them, why is that? Are you doing something about that? I feel like they are, based on that response. But you see it. If you go and look at enough leadership pages across this ecosystem, it is mostly men. And I would like to hear what the companies themselves are doing. I know there are a few initiatives to improve that, but it requires them to not hire their best friends, right? Like if you're a man and you have a bunch of male friends in the industry and you're going to hire them to be your executive leadership team, then you probably didn't invite any women to the table, nor did you invite anybody that had any other background to the table. And so you've created an echo chamber for yourself, and that may not be the best way to be successful at your job.
It may seem kind of obvious, and especially like us being women and having a little bit of that experience, but why is that important for maybe those that just don't know and they're not in the position? Why is the diversity of background, of thought, of gender, like why is that important?
For gender specifically, there are studies that correlate having a woman CEO with higher profit margins. And I don't know if we really exactly know why that is. Like I said, it's correlated. It says, hey, there's evidence that this happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because women in those upper levels typically mean that there are other diversity programs that are happening to sort of reinforce those things. So that is one point, but I also think just from a diversity of thought perspective, like I just said with the echo chamber, if you are all thinking exactly the same way and you don't have anybody to call you on it and say, hey, that's not the way I saw it be successful over here, then you've all convinced yourself that you know exactly what to do and you haven't actually thought about the problem from all angles. And that comes more with diversity of experience and different backgrounds and different mindsets. And you can toss out whether or not it's women or white men versus different ethnic backgrounds. I think if you can just get to the point where you have enough diversity of experience, diversity of degree fields, then you get the best problem solving, and you'll do it. You'll solve every problem as quickly as you can.
Mm-hmm. And we like to get stuff done, so like maybe there's a little bit of that too.
Right.
Well, I've asked a lot of questions that were my own, but I do want to make sure that I sprinkle in a few that we got from our audience here. So let's see. Wheellock World asks, how do you recover a module when the outer shell wears out?
Well, I mean, you design every module, whether it's a soft shell or a soft good, or a metallic structure, you design it for a life. So you don't recover it after your shell wears out. You have a life and then it is done. Now, what you do have to do for any type of module is have some type of repair methodology. If you do have something that breaks through your shell, you got to be able to repair it so that it's not just a sucking hole to space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. We've got another question is what your children think of mom having a job that will help people explore and live in space. I like that one.
Your kids never appreciate what you do. I do think both of my kids think it's really cool that I'm the boss, so to speak. And they have thought this for some time now. They used to get a big kick out of me having calls when I would pick them up from school. When I worked at Pratt & Whitney, I had a lot of men that worked for me. And they would hear me on calls and they would say, do they work for you? They just thought it was so amazing that their mom got to tell other people what to do, plus men that were older than me. But they don't really love space, not the way I do, which is disappointing to me.
A little sad.
I'm really trying, but they're just like that. The space stuff, whatever. It's just cool that you have the role that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe they don't. How old are they now?
13 and 10. Like they're old enough to want to be part of this, but
well, maybe it's a thing that like it comes with time, and they'll be more impressed and a little more grateful as they get a little bit older. I see that we have another question here. How about a space station for storage of food and propellant?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's kind of up our alley is storage, and that's something that we talk to the Department of Defense about, and we've had some conversations with NASA about. So for sure, storage is much easier for us with the way talking about the roadmap. Sorry, let me go back to that. So we have Alpha 20. It is not going to be crewed. And so the next step from that would be to do storage, where you don't necessarily have crew in and out all the time, and then moving into something where you have crew in there all the time. That's kind of the step functions we would look at.
Okay. Another question here is, can you compare and contrast Max Space with Bigelow, Gravitics, and Orbital Reef? That's a loaded one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So Bigelow was the company that put up Genesis 1, 2, and Beam, but they did that by working with Thin Red Line. So I don't really know that there's a comparison and contrast there, other than just to like clarify for folks that when you think about Bigelow having inflatables, you're really thinking about the predecessor to MaxSpace. Gravitics is metal modules. We've already kind of compared and contrasted the differences that we have. We have the unique value proposition of how little we weigh in comparison to the metallic modules. And then looking at Orbital Reef and other inflatable providers, I don't know of anybody that has the same type of architecture that we have, where as I said before, it's this unidirectional, it's very lightweight as compared to the basket weave.
Okay. Are there any plans for artificial gravity?
No. I have on my reading list some articles to go research more about this, because I will admit I don't really understand the pull. I'm seeing more and more about that. So it tells me that there's something in the market that I need to understand. Certainly, I understand there are some providers that are working on limited artificial gravity so that you can sort of test how something would work on the moon or work on Mars before it gets there. That I totally get. I will say that if we're talking about artificial gravity for humans being in there, I'm like, why would you go to space? Like, back to the whole hotel idea. Why would you have a hotel in space that has gravity? Aren't you going to experience weightlessness? Like, what am I missing about that conversation? Like I said, I may have some more reading to do to bring me up to speed, but that's just not something that resonates with me. If I go to space, I want to float.
I like it. Okay. Let's see. Another question here. For the module going up on SpaceX transporter, what are the mission objectives?
So, number one is just to deploy our new module to verify that it rolls out the way that it needs to roll out, and that it will transmit data back down to the Earth. But we are don't have them signed yet, but we are working with some payload customers to fly some things on the mission. And so another important mission objective would be to say, hey, we were able to integrate, we were able to respond to their user requirements, and now we're able to provide what they need on the mission. And they'll have their own mission objectives, but that would be some of ours, is having their mission objectives and helping them accomplish those.
Excellent. To the extent that you can talk about it, how do you decide which launch provider you're going to go with? Obviously SpaceX is well known in the industry, but there are obviously others, Relativity or Rocket Lab. Is there a reason that you specifically pick SpaceX, and could in the future you might be looking at some of the others?
I think we would and are launch agnostic. So you're looking at cost, you're looking at timing, what is the availability of the volume that they have on that particular mission? Are you having to look, for example, to purchase maybe more volume than you needed to, because that's the way to guarantee your mission? So we have spoken with other launch providers, and we would definitely continue to have those conversations in the future. And I have a personal hope that others will work out, just to see that the industry is expanding from sort of that single launch provider that it feels like we have.
Okay. And there's a question about some of the technological advances of MaxSpace. So how is MaxSpace setting itself apart from competitors?
I just keep having to go back to saying we were providing a very lightweight module. Nobody is going to compare to how lightweight our module is. That, and the fact that it is very low cost to produce. It only takes a very few number of engineers and technicians to produce one, which means you have lower overhead rates, you have lower engineer costs to your production. Very inexpensive to produce, very inexpensive to launch. And while I haven't seen costs from competitors, nor do I expect to, I would just say I don't think anybody's going to beat our prices.
Love it. That's a sure way, to get a deal done. Like, hey, we're the best price.
Right.
Yeah, I'm curious. So we talked a little bit about like some of the technical stuff. We talked about a little bit of the commercial, like finding customers, how you'll sell those, who you would sell it to. Can you at a high level at least kind of highlight some of like policy or regulation challenges that you're facing? I mean, I think it's getting a little bit more available, more access for commercial space companies to launch their payload and partner with different organizations. But with that comes laws, regulation, policy. So can you talk a little bit to that, and what are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not like a government affairs person. So
Yeah,
anybody who's listening to this that's government affairs, you're going to know way more than I do. And I love my government affairs people because that's what they do 100% of the time. I think and maybe this is kind of coming from my Axiom heritage and I'm bringing it over into MaxSpace, is my curiosity about how NASA is actually helping to grow the commercial space industry. With what NASA has been doing in low Earth orbit up to this point, we talked a lot about the research and that you're trying to take some of that research, continue some of it, look at different things, but also transition into manufacturing. Right now, NASA subsidizes all of that. And how is commercial industry supposed to make money with their business model when the government model is something that is so counter to what a commercial business is going to be able to do? And so I think that's something that's on my mind of like, what is that transition plan? Are there facets of that I'm missing? I don't think so, but maybe. And I definitely think that's something that has to be worked through more so that there are more opportunities for different types of providers, whether it is the CLDs, the Axioms, the Voyagers, the orbital reefs of the world, the galaxy, or whether it's things like uncrewed options. You've got Varda and others that could be playing in that space. But again, if you can fly it to the International Space Station and you don't have to pay for that crew time, or you don't have to pay for that up mass or down mass, why would you go pay somebody else to do that work for you? And I think that's what the industry is going to struggle with until we have more of a direction from the civil authority in the matter.
Yeah, absolutely. That a lot of it is going to depend on, like you said, the civil authority. So there's a question, and I'm going to paraphrase there, but could the MaxSpace modules go past the moon, go past Mars, go to like some of the Lagrange points, L1, L2, like, is that an option? Could it go that far? Is there some limitation on the distance or how long it can remain inflated? Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely want to refer to Maxim on some of the more technical questions. I don't know of any limitations on those. Back to, it's all a design feature, right? If you say my mission has to do X, then you design to X, and then you're able to accomplish that. But there may be some nuances of that I'm missing. I'd have to defer to Maxim.
Okay, we'll leave the technical question there. We have a question here. This is from one of my fellow cohort students. What about MaxSpace was enticing to make the switch from Axiom?
So, I mean, just to clarify, I left Axiom without another job lined up. I just needed some time off. I had run myself ragged, and I spent a few weeks on the beach, and then I felt good, and I was ready to find my next position. And I think I was interviewing for different positions all around the same time. So I still can answer the question and say I did have other positions, but I chose MaxSpace for a reason. And what was that reason? I think part of it's because I'm a helper at my core. I feel like that is why I'm here on the earth, is to help. And I felt like a very young, new, small organization has a lot that they are going to need. And I bring a lot of different kinds of experience to bear. And I felt like I could help. So that was a big part of it. But the other big part of it was just seeing Maxim and Aaron interact. I got to see them interact in person before I officially said yes to the job. And I think they just really care about each other. And you don't always see that. Again, these are not best friends from 20 years ago. They just met recently. But they definitely have a deep affection for one another. And it just felt really good. So I was excited about it for that reason.
I want to be a part of that. I love it. I mean, so much of taking a role within a company is about the culture, is about how, you see the leadership run their teams. Is that a place that you want to be a part of? So I love that you mentioned that. I see we have another question here. For the lunar module version, are you partnering with a lander company or potentially building the entire module?
Yeah, so for lunar modules right now, we would be partnering, and really for even modules that are Alpha 20 module that we've talked about a little bit, we have other people that are providing aspects of the mission. So we'll have a satellite bus provider that's providing like the power and communications and things like that. And so we would expect to utilize other we'll call them subject matter expert companies in areas that we are not experts. We are definitely experts on the inflatable, the structural technology, but where you need guidance, navigation, and control, and this, the landing aspect is very complicated. We would definitely work with somebody else if that were something that we were selected for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of working with someone else, we're starting to see more of these partnerships between space companies and non-space brands. For example, like Intuitive Machines and Columbia, the brand wear. Is that something that could be, of interest? I mean, if a company says, "Hey, we got a paycheck, and here we want to put our logo on the side of your inflatable habitat," is that a possibility? Is that something that you could consider?
I'm laughing, as you can see. There was a LinkedIn post about a week and a half ago where the man who posted was very against the SpaceX Doritos partnership that they have for the current mission.
Yeah.
And he compared it to NASCAR. And I jumped in and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know why I have to bring NASCAR into this because I love NASCAR. I'm very, not like their core audience, but I love NASCAR. I'm like, they've got a good thing going. They understand marketing. They know how to market to their base. All their sponsors are pretty much targeted to their core audience, some of which resonate with me and others which don't. But I think the same should and might need to be true for space. We were just talking about how NASA hasn't made it easy on these commercial companies. And so if you were to say tomorrow, well, you can't have advertising dollars or you have to turn that away, I don't know how many missions are going to be able to be flown without that supplementary sort of income. And if we can find a way to do it the way NASCAR does, very targeted to the space core audience, I think it's organic. I don't see anything wrong with it. And I think it's just goodness for everybody.
I love it. I'm hoping we see some cool logos on the side of those, habitats here soon. Obviously, NASA being the organization that it is the authority, as you mentioned before. What could us as normal people do to potentially influence NASA? I mean, obviously that could be hard, but how can the average everyday person show their support and say, hey, we want to see more commercial companies within the ecosystem? How could we support that?
I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure that I have a great answer for that. I mean, that the answer that kind of comes to mind, and I'm not sure if it's the right one, is, like write your congressperson. And maybe that is the right one because, NASA is ultimately an administration. It is reportable to Congress. And I think maybe that's the right thing to do, is just to sort of say, hey, the people love what you're doing, NASA. They love what you're doing. And I think that's true of a lot of people in the U.S. They support NASA, but just letting your government officials know that you're also wanting to see other things. Maybe that's the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good place to start. I would tell anybody that's wondering, like, why do we have all these commercial space companies, and giving them the example of SpaceX and how they've been able to drive down the cost of launch. That's money saved to the taxpayer. So that's why this is important, and how the space industry and the ecosystem benefits us here on Earth, and that's why it's important. Anything else to add to that piece of why it's important that we pursue space?
Well, I mean, there's a ton we could talk about why we shouldn't pursue space, but I do want to hit back on your point about SpaceX. I mean, it's basic economics. that, you can have monopolies and that does not provide the best value for the consumers. That never happens. So you want to have a lot of different players in the market to provide the best value for consumers. And without space, I think most of us on this podcast know your cell phone doesn't work. You're back to having to drive around with a map to figure out where you're going. And there's a lot of different other advantages that we have today because of space. And imagine how many more we'll have in 20 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell people. Well, I know we're just about at time. So my last question that we're going to end today with is, what are you optimistic about? What are you excited about in the space industry?
I'm optimistic about the whole industry. I mean, I think 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I couldn't have predicted what we're seeing today. And so I think that as problematic as certain things are about the industry, that it's still very new and not everybody has the best business plans and all those things, and you still have to get investors. There's a lot of potential. And so people with great ideas, great business minds, there's just so much that can be done. And I can't wait to see in 10 years, you and I will not be able to predict on this call the goodness that will come out of it. I couldn't have predicted the iPhone before it came about. And there's just so many advancements that now we take for granted. And we're going to look back on this podcast and go, oh yeah, like who knew that we were going to be able to do that? So I'm very optimistic that there's going to be some really good life-changing advancements because of space.
I love it. I think that's sums it up exactly right. We're going to see a lot of new innovations and new developments that are going to come from the space industry, and it's going to positively impact all of us. So I'm also excited. I always say this on the podcast, but the best is yet to come. I 100% agree that specifically when it comes to the space industry, we're gonna see a lot of those positive things come out in the future.
100% agree.
Well, I want to just say thank you so much for joining today. It was a pleasure to chat with you. I mean, we went through a lot of topics and you rallied, you got through all of those questions. So thank you so much. You're a wealth of knowledge and a pleasure to chat with.
Thanks so much, Ashton. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you to everybody that tuned in today. Thank you to our friends at Liftport. We're going to wrap it up today the same way